So this is how the resin cured for the center portion. The straw worked really well. Gave it a good shape. Did have to add some extra hot glue here because it did have a leak. But what I did notice with the part that leaked, it actually made it more solid and more stable. Because in reality, if I had the means, I currently don't have a vacuum chamber, I would have stabilized this stick because I plan to carve into it, and I have a feeling that it's going to get really flaky. So what I'm going to do right now is brush on some resin and so it absorbs more into the wood, and I believe that that will help me carve into it later with my rotary tool, because like as I said here, it got pretty tough, and I think I'd be able to take the rotary tool. So here is the cured wand after the first coat of resin. It did harden it as I hoped it would for the most part. There's a little few spots that seem a little bit soft underneath the bark. I might do a second coat before I start carving into it to get some vein-like lines in it that I'll fill with red resin. What I'm going to do next though is start the inner core of the gem that's going to be at the bottom. And I cut up an old highlighter that I'm going to hot glue onto this and fill with black resin. So the inner core of the black is set. Next up, I'm going to take this out of this straw mold and take this hot glue off, probably use a heat gun. And I'm going to make a mold for the outer shell with some corrugated plastic. And then I'll do the same for the back end after this cures. Well, I did manage to get most of the glue off, and then I realized, I tried not to heat the resin too much, but it did get a little flimsy. Hopefully it'll re-solidify. I'm going to do the same thing to get the glue off of this end, and hopefully it gets harder, and then I'll sand this a little bit flush, maybe get a little part of this straw plastic off by sanding, because I want this to come more to a point before I encase it with another layer of red resin. Same goes for this end. Alright, so I got most of the glue off of this end as well, and it came off a lot easier, and it doesn't seem like the heat made this side of the resin get flimsy at all. It held up its integrity. I think the reasoning why this end got more flimsier and softer is because I probably put more acrylic paint with this resin, so it didn't get fully super hard. Whereas this one, I think I put less black. And that's one of the tricky things when you're adding acrylic as opposed to like inks into resin. It can cure softly. Next up, I'm going to take this to the belt sander, sand off this highlighter cap, and make this to a point, or a shape rather. I'm not sure if it's going to be a point or just like a nub. And this one for sure is going to be sharpened into a point. Alright, now that I have sanded all the rough spots that I wanted to get rid of on the inner wand gem portions, I'm going to cast it inside this completed mold. with some red tinted resin. What I've done here is cut a hole in the back section of this corrugated plastic mold. What I'm going to do is put it through here. Put a lot of hot glue all around there, make sure it's nice and sealed up. And fill this with red resin. It looks like it'll be, pretty good size. And then I'm going to have to hold the wand up at the back end to make sure it sets evenly with a little piece of plastic. Alright, so the hot glue has cured here. It's nice and solid at the base. I even glued in the little piece of plastic you can see here that's holding it up. What I end up having to do, since this resin has too much acrylic in it, it bends when it gets warmer. I put this little string here to hold it up so they won't bend too far before I was ready to cast it with more resin. So after I dye the resin with some alcohol ink, I'm going to pour it into here, but first I'll pull the string out of the way, and then hopefully this shouldn't bend as far down. I don't have to worry about this again because this one cured correctly. I used less acrylic, so I'll note that in the future. Let me mix in the alcohol dyes and cast this. So here is the cured resin. I kind of had to screw up once again. Trying to get out the air bubbles, it got overheated and kind of made more air bubbles. Similar to what happened to my staff. Yeah, not letting the resin cure naturally kind of makes that happen, or if you stir it too fast and whatnot. But I always like to still try and finish a project through and work through my mistakes and see if I can still get the result that I want. And I'm still going to do that. So here you go right here. I peeled it a little bit here to see how it'll be. I noticed that as the resin got super heated, it also made the glue melt a little bit, so it made it stick more to the corrugated plastic, but it should still peel off pretty good. So let's get this out, and then after that I will cast the bottom section. Now the tricky part is I'm going to have to deliberately make it overheat so that it'll match the top red section now. And with that I'll be using a yogurt cup and this lid, hot glue it together, cut a hole, put this bottom section through, hot glue that, seal it, and then I'll put the resin through, and then deliberately overheat it so it'll match the top section. Well, I finally got the resin out of the mold. It was a long process, and I'm sure I made a few mistakes along the way, but it's a learning process, and now I'm going to get ready to sand this down. Instead of shaping this to the final desired point, I decided to cast this end as well with some red resin and then shape them both around the same time. I'm going to be using this old yogurt cup, which I have found that these peel off pretty easily with resin, and it's about the shape I like to start with when I start carving this end out. Now I'm going to begin sanding this down to the shapes that I want using the belt sander. I think I'm going to start with the rear gem first because I'm more excited about making that shape before I do this one, which is mainly going to be like a point. This is what I have it ground down to so far. What I'm going to go for is more of a point, but I have to make sure to keep on wetting it so I could see the inner core, make sure I sand it down evenly. It's going to be the same with this portion, because once you sand it, it starts getting harder and harder to see, unless you add some wetness to it. You can see a little bit. I decided to go with the point for this end and this end because as I'm working on this, I'm realizing that the character that's going to wield this is kind of on the brutal side, so it's going to be a magic wand, but also it could be used as like a close quarters sort of knife. So I got it to a point, kind of looks like a strawberry. What I'm going to do is take this to a light so I could closer see to make sure that the inner and outer gems match up as closely as possible. And then I'll put some sharper outside edges to it to make it look more gem-like. And then I'll start on the top portion of it. So I managed to get the glue off at the base of the rear gem, but it has a little bit of a well, and so I'm going to use my 1-inch belt sander because it's more flexibility to smooth it out. And I also cut down the strawberry shape a little bit more, and I probably will still again. I evened out this base here. Any other little voids or whatnot that may have popped up are going to be filled up when I brush a couple clear coats of resin on top of the whole thing when it's done. But now I'm going to start on this top portion. I'm going to start with the 1-inch belt sander because it spins a lot faster and cuts through material quicker. I may end up switching back to my larger belt sander, but we'll see. So this is eating up a lot of sandpaper and time. So what I'm going to attempt to do is trim it off more closer to the black on the inside using the bandsaw, and then from there sand it to shape. Now this is something more I can work with on the sander. So let's get back to sanding. So I pretty much rounded this over, and next up I'm going to make some sharper edges to make it look more like a gemstone as well, but a really sharp one. This is the finalized shape that I went for with the wand. I got some nice sharp edges on here to make it look more like it's a gemstone on both ends. You can already see it here while it's still in its rough phase. So I'm going to do some wet sanding to it before I start to paintbrush on some clear coat resin, and I'll probably do 2 or 3 coats on the gem portions, and I'll probably do 4 or 5 maybe on the stick part, because it's still a very weak stick, and since it wasn't actually stabilized properly, I want it to be really sturdy. And then after all of that, I'm still going to plan on putting like a red collection of resin in this little well here. And I'm still debating whether or not I'm going to put some lines, or like veins rather, into the branch to look like more like blood flowing. So it'll be like some red resin veins. But it depends on how sturdy I feel that the branch is, because it still is pretty flimsy. I don't want to lose any more bark. But we'll see after I polish everything else off here. Now that I have this sanded to the shape that I wanted, and I smoothed it out with some higher grit sandpapers, not all the way, because I know that when I put the coatings of resin over the gem portions, it'll get rid of all the scratches. What I'm going to do now is drill a small hole into this portion here and place this small hook so that I can hold it from this hook and brush on the resin. And I'm not going to worry about the hole that I'm going to make, because after the resin layers have cured on around it, I'm going to take this out and I'm going to make this section with resin and red. So this is basically just so I can hold it up and brush on the resin. So now what I'm going to do is find a place to hang this up so that I can put resin on the other side. I have a limited workspace, so I have to do that off camera. Here's the wand after a brushing of resin. The wood section came out pretty well. And overall, the red gem section came out decent. It will need another couple coats probably. There's some spots here on the main larger portion that are missing some resin, and it looks like for back here I had some gathering, some drip that I'm going to have to go back and sand off and reapply resin, which is fine because you can probably not make it out as much in the camera here, but there's some sanding marks from the belt that still did not get covered up by the resin as it usually does, which means that it needed more finer sanding. So I'm going to redo that part as well. So there you have it. This is the completed Blood Magic wand. I have to say I had a blast making it, and it pretty much turned out the way I envisioned it when I first found this branch some time ago. I definitely foresee myself making some more magic wands in a similar fashion in the near future, and it's given me plenty of story ideas for some future comic books and illustrations that I can do as well. And yeah, I am definitely pleased with the way this turned out. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you're planning to make some wands of your own, I hope it gave you some good ideas and maybe gave you some new ideas of way to do things differently that I did. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment down below, and thank you again for watching.